morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where I'm going to put a button on my Comic-Con 2014 coverage by getting in a few last stories that I didn't get to cover over the weekend, but which I think definitely warrant your attention. Now, another movie coming out in 2016, which isn't getting nearly as much attention as Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, is Warcraft from former DC production company Legendary Pictures, although now they seem to like to just be called Legendary. But I think that Warcraft had a nice showing at Comic-Con. It wasn't as big, obviously, as Marvel or DC, or even some of the other announcements that Legendary made, such as Godzilla 2 or Skull Island. That got more attention. But Warcraft, it's a hardened warrior of a property, done quite well in the video game market, and it's marching towards the silver screen. Undeterred, I think. And it's laying the groundwork for something that's very new. As we talked about The Last of Us, the video game that Sam Raimi is turning into a movie along with Naughty Dog, their cooperation. That's actually going to factor into the last story today, the viewer question. So we'll come full circle. But as I said in that coverage, we are entering, I think, the beginning of a video game trend in movie adaptations. Just like the comic books have done so well, I think finally video games are going to have a go at it. A real solid, legitimate go at it. Not like the older ones where like Resident Evil and Doom and all these video game adaptations were very loosely done, and I think that was their biggest problem, that they didn't satisfy the fandom. But now, Hollywood has seen how much money they can make, not just being successful, but financially successful, by taking comic book properties seriously. I think they're ready to take video games seriously. However, Duncan Jones, who appeared at Comic-Con on behalf of Warcraft for Legendary, he's directing it. I'm so excited for Duncan Jones to finally get his big mainstream feature. He did Moon. I love Moon. I sing its praises every chance I get. If you haven't watched Moon, go watch it. He also did a nice job with source code. I could guess a lot of the ending things, early on in the film, but it's still a very solid piece of filmmaking. And he was up for so many other gigs. Man of Steel, he was on the short list. A couple of other things as well, but he just wasn't getting picked. And finally, Legendary scooped him up and stuck him on Warcraft. And then it got delayed from 2015 to 2016 because it had to get out of the way of Star Wars Episode 7. But anyway, Duncan Jones was there, and he said that he's working very hard to make Warcraft mainstream, accessible to those who aren't familiar with the game. I don't believe it's a console game. I think it's a computer game, correct? I've actually written some stories for the world of Warcraft, comic books back when Tokyo Pop was in business, some manga, so I'm very familiar with the storytelling aspects of it and the world building, but I'm afraid I don't know very much about the specifics of the game. So anyone watching who's a Warcraft player, there's also StarCraft. You can be sure if Warcraft is successful, Legendary will be getting ready to do a StarCraft movie, which is basically Warcraft in space. But anyway, so Duncan Jones says, I'm going to try and make it more accessible to people, and he showed some footage. And he said it's going to be an origin story. It's not, don't get too excited, but it was still some good footage. And he said that this Warcraft will be an origin story talking about how humans came to be at war with the orcs on the planet, and not the planet, I think it's just the world, like another dimension, of Azeroth. Oh, Teen Titans fans, how are we going to think of anything but Raven, right? Every time I hear Azeroth, that's where my mind goes. But I'm sure that after Warcraft comes out, Legendary and Duncan Jones are hoping I will think of a new realm. Ben Foster, of course, stars, and what's more exciting than a Duncan Jones mainstream feature? It's one starring Ben Foster. Those are two really strong artistic talents that are going to take a shot at the big league, so I'm very hopeful for them. Paula Patton's also on board. Much to Robin Thicke's dismay. I wonder if they can have like a little orc following her around, like a lovesick troll, which I think Robin Thicke is to some degree, if you hear some of the shenanigans he's off to. But anyway, so they showed some footage of Warcraft, and it was like a human and an orc reading from their battle diaries, and they didn't show any characters or anything like that. They haven't really shot anything. I think they showed a lot of the rendering, a lot of the world building, what Azeroth will look like. Maybe some, I think there were a couple of teases of battle sequences. I think it would have maybe benefited Warcraft to release, I don't know, like a map of Azeroth, just something for people, especially because this convention people were so hungry for material. I think something like that would have gotten a lot of play. But they did have some weapons on display, and of course we all like looking at weapons. We've been enjoying it ever since Peter Peter Jackson came with his Lord of the Rings and then the Hobbit trilogies. They've always had some wonderful weapons on display at the, I believe it's Weta booth, the Weta booth. But then they had some at Legendary here they're being built for Warcraft. They look very cool, very big. You know, we talk about Wonder Woman's stumpy little lady sword. That's a sword. We've got a hammer, some kind of crest. I think it looks very good. And also we got this motion graphic, which, by the way, people are being very cruel to here on YouTube when Legendary posted it. A lot of dislikes. I think people aren't really impressed with the quality of the special effects. It does seem a little heavy metal, a little 80s, maybe 80s, 90s computer game when you think about it. Maybe there should be more in Sony's pixels than over here in Warcraft. But I think they just wanted to give something. But I guess this is a lesson learned that while it's nice to give something, make sure you're giving something good. I don't think it's horrible, but then I don't play the game, so I'm going to be a little more forgiving than Warcraft fans. But I'm very excited to see this come together. I would have liked to have seen some releases from it, but that's the current status of Warcraft. And Legendary, you know, I think look for its presence to increase exponentially at the next, certainly the next Comic-Con. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story, let's revisit that Warner Brothers panel. As I said, there were other things that the studio had to promote besides Batman vs. Superman. But like everybody checked out after that Batman vs. Superman footage reveal and Wonder Woman reveal at the beginning of the panel. I think they were right to put it at the panel, as I said in my review of that. They certainly didn't want to make the poor Mad Max and Hobbit panel discussions have to deal with people being like, that's nice, where's Batman versus Superman? And they seem to have some nice elements on display there. I think that the rest of the Warner Brothers panel played a little bit more like an industry event than a fan event. I would say some of the panels this year did kind of verge towards, you know, CinemaCon and stuff like that, which is, I believe the term is CinemaCon. It's a convention in Las Vegas for theater owners who have to book these movies on their screens. And that's a very different audience, obviously. And so I think maybe they were still in that mindset, some of the studios. So I thought that George Miller came out and talked about Mad Max Fury Road, and he gave a very nice statement about Warner Brothers. He said, this is a studio that lets an artist make their movie. What a nice thing to say. And I think it really speaks to the relationship that Jeff Robinov worked so hard to build with so much talent, that this was a studio that was built on relationships. And I think that I wonder if we've been all wondering if Kevin Tsujihara can maintain that. Tsujihara seems to have a wonderful relationship with J.K. Rowling, as he was able to get her on board for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them by giving her the ability to write that script. That was a huge concession on his part and a huge win for her. But clearly that's another example of caring about the talent. So wonderful thing for Miller to say, and he must be super happy with the way Mad Max Fury Road is turning out. They revealed some posters, but as I said in my review of Comic-Con overall, I felt that the posters were really just, you know, a little bit Photoshop versions of the photos we've already seen from the set, or stills from the movie, I guess, that were over on Entertainment Weekly about a week or so ago, and that I covered here on Morning Movie News. So I think the movie looks fascinating, and so that was just nice. That was a nice quote that George Miller gave them. Then for The Hobbit, Stephen Colbert narrated. He was the moderator for that portion of the Warner Brothers presentation in costume from his cameo blinking. I missed his cameo, by the way. That's because he's hard to spot without his trademark glasses and black hair. So when they make him up like this, I missed him totally. Thankfully someone had a still later on when I actually saw The Desolation of Smaug. But it was great for him to come here in character and to moderate this. And he had some good jokes about Elijah Wood never aging. Because Peter Jackson talked about casting him when he was 18, and Stephen Colbert was like, he's still 18. I thought that was great. And they showed an outtakes reel. They showed a teaser trailer and this like mega wraparound poster. But of course, none of this was released to the public, which I think is why that portion of the Warner Brothers presentation just didn't get a lot of traction with the public. And it needed to. So many of you ask me, where is The Hobbit? Where's The Hobbit trailer? We got a poster at least, and I talked about that over the weekend, and I thought the poster looked great, and I thought the change in focus in terms of characters was smart on the part of Warner Brothers in terms of trying to maybe have this a little bit of a higher box office opening, whereas Smaug was a loss on the opening of Unexpected Journey. So very nice presentations. They were nice presentations, and I think those are, while they might not have wowed, I think those are definitely two films that I'm excited for, and I think that a lot of you are excited for as well. So the third story this is from the comic book side, and it also deals with movies, obviously. But we got some preview art of the Star Wars comic that Marvel is putting out. It was the end of an era that Dark Horse lost their license because, of course, when Disney bought Star Wars and they already own Marvel, they want to bring everything in-house. It's similar to how Boom lost the Disney and Pixar license and Muppets license when Disney bought Marvel because they were so successful putting out comics. I even wrote some of those comics. I wrote Muppet Peter Pan. Not totally I have just as a disclaimer for reasons that I can't professionally disclaim. Not 100% happy with the way that comic turned out. I love the first issue. So go pick up the first issue of Muppet Peter Pan and then do yourself a favor and skip the rest. I just have to be honest. I don't want anyone spending money on something that I don't feel is up to the standards of Superbia, which I also wrote for Boom. I have a very good relationship with Boom. They're a great company. But anyway, so Star Wars going over to Marvel, and Jason Aaron is writing. I think Jason Aaron is a really talented comic book writer. He's also handling Lady Thor. I know everyone said not to call it that, but we can't help ourselves, right? It's just catchy. Even Chris Hemsworth was making jokes about turning into a woman at the Marvel panel. So Jason Aaron's handling that. Also, as a side note, I believe I mentioned it before, but if you are picking up Southern Bastards that he's writing, it's an indie comic, you should pick it up. It's very well done. It's like kind of like a cable TV show, which I'm sure it's a pitch for, but it's very good. So Jason Aaron is writing, and then John Cassidy, you can see, is doing the art. You probably best know him as the artist on Joss Whedon's X-Men run, but he's done, I think, Planetary, that's the name of the comic that he also was an artist on. He's a very good artist. But I'm not so happy with the way this is turning out, I have to say, because I think that the Han Solo art just looks like it's, Greg Land did it, like, just like a light box, just, traced the photos of Harrison Ford back in the day. And I think that's the problem with trying to bring real life actors onto the comic book page. We know what they look like in motion, and so the static image just seems it just seems too static. And I think Cassidy, maybe some artists would be capable of making this seem more organic, but right now it just seems super awkward and product placement-y. So I would say that I think it's great that Marvel's doing Star Wars comics. I found that because I'm not that into the Star Wars universe beyond the movies, I've always found it very hard to get into the Dark Horse comics because they relied so heavily on that expanded universe. So I'm curious if Marvel can make something that's a little more accessible, but I would have made it with new characters. I feel that trying to just do a children's book, it just comes across like a children's book version, right, of the movies, just isn't a good way to go. But I'm curious. I'll definitely be picking it up, by the way, and I'm curious what you guys think. Will you definitely pick it up too? And do you have high hopes for it or low expectations? All right, so let's get on to that viewer question from Rodrigo Ferez. And Rodrigo says, "Hi, Grace. Would you please answer my question?" Yes, I will, Rodrigo. It's my pleasure. Thank you for asking. And Rodrigo says, "Regarding the announcement of a Last of Us movie, do you think they can pull off the quality of storytelling as they did in the video game? I think one of the reasons these video game stories are doing so well and with critics is the freedom of time they have to properly develop a storyline, since it's not like a movie, which usually lasts up to tops 3 hours. Do you think they can truly pull it off by fitting the story to this sort of length? It certainly did not work as planned in other video game adaptations like Resident Evil, as you mentioned. What do you think? Thanks for your time and keep up the good work. Smiley face." Well, Rodrigo, I couldn't agree more. I think this is a similar problem that you see with movie adaptations of television shows. Or, for instance, case in point, The Last Airbender, Avatar The Last Airbender. They try to take an entire season and make it a short film, and it seemed rushed and nonsensical. So, but I think that what's very encouraging here, and this is a hurdle video games are going to have to get over because they want to get into the movie market, and I think Hollywood finally is willing to work with them in a way where they can be involved. I think that's been the obstacle because, look, when you have comic book creators, they're used to a different medium, a static medium. But video game creators, they're already making movies, many movies, and sometimes, as you pointed out, Rodrigo, very long, epic films that are hours and hours in length. So they know what they're doing, and they're very reluctant to hand over their toys to Hollywood, which I think, with good reason these days, is clearly they don't always know what they're doing. So I would tell the video game people not to totally trust Hollywood. But as I said, Hollywood wants the money that's potentially on the table here, and now they're finally willing to play ball. So that's why I think you see Naughty Dog getting such strong inclusion in the Last of Us movie. Naughty Dog said, we get director approval, cast approval, final say, not just we're going to be consulted. And J.K. Rowling had that kind of say over the Harry Potter franchise, and obviously that worked out quite well. That also had its problems, though, in being adapted to a shorter length, considering how long the books are. I always say, in my opinion, that the answer is to tell a new story from that universe. That way you can adjust the story to fit the time, and it's because it's hard for an adaptation to compare to the original, especially when you can't do it minute for minute, word for word because of these time restraints. Now, obviously, they can't do that for The Last of Us. They have to do an origin story. So maybe I would consider breaking it up. I would find a certain point in the story where I'm like, okay, we can end here on a cliffhanger. If we don't get to make a sequel, it would reasonably be an okay standalone film. I know it's not great to make a movie that needs to have a sequel. You shouldn't be that reliant on that kind of success. But you know what? I don't know if The Last of Us has a choice. I think they're better off making a really strong film that, yes, unfortunately, needs a sequel to be completed. But I'm curious to what you guys think. Do you think there's any way Hollywood can pull this off, even if Naughty Dog is looking over their shoulder? And do you think that, where would you break up the Last of Us story? Try and put spoilers if you're going to do that, so anyone who hasn't played the game and doesn't want a spoiler can avoid it. But I'm just curious to what you guys think and what you would advise, because you know the game quite well yourselves. All right, that's today's morning movie news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Back to, tomorrow, we'll be back to regular movie news, non-comic booky, non-Comic-Con. Hopefully we'll see what happens next year at Comic-Con. We've got a whole year, and the studios have a whole year to plan, maybe a little something more spectacular, right? All right, write your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for tuning in, and you can check out some more episodes right now. Bye.